you for joining us on this episode. So today we have our wonderful Dr. Patricia Bartolome here. She's going to introduce herself a little bit more later, but first, Dr. B, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking a matcha latte,
Ooh,
sponsored by Coffee Bean.
And today I'm drinking a dark chocolate chai latte. I'm obsessed with the Coffee Bean dark chocolate series, so this has a warm place in my heart.
It sounds so good. I need to try that.
Yeah, it's delicious. Highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. B, let's start with a little introduction. Tell us a little bit about your background, your current work status.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm an occupational therapist. So I graduated from West Coast University April 2022. So it's been about 2 years, almost 2 years since I've been working in the clinical setting. I work at a acute rehab setting and also in acute care in the hospital. So I primarily work with adults, specifically neuro rehab. So I mainly work with that population. And I also teach as an adjunct assistant professor part-time. So a little bit of everything.
She does it all, everybody. She does it all. I love it. We're just going to kind of talk about your transition from being a new grad, moving into becoming a practitioner.
Okay.
How prepared were you to apply for jobs? And maybe what are some recommendations you would make for new grads?
So right after graduation, I kind of already knew what setting I wanted to work in. So I think when it comes to your fieldwork rotations, this is your chance to get a better idea of which setting you want to work in and where you see yourself as a new grad. So thankfully, I had a rotation in the hospital setting, and that's when I knew I wanted to focus on that as a new grad. So when it came to searching for job openings, I narrowed my search. I definitely wanted to stay local, so I went with hospitals that were near me, and then I went with hospitals that were looking for OTs that are okay with new grads coming in. Because some hospital settings, they want that like 1 year, 2 year minimum experience. So I tried looking for a place that was a little bit more flexible with how much experience you have. I also went through referrals. So I think that's like a really good outlet, especially if you're struggling finding those job applications online, is to reach out to like OT cohorts that graduated before you or people that you know are practicing in a hospital. Reach out to them and ask them if there's any openings, because you are more likely to get a job if you are referred there versus just coming in blankly with an application online. Yeah. So I recommend going through referrals. And this is also where like your networking comes into play while you're in field work. So try to build those like build your network while you're in field work so you have more connections as you get into, as a new grad, right? Any tips for that? I mean, I guess the networking, right? The networking, building your relationship, and solidifying where you want to see yourself once you get close to graduation and getting your NBCOT.
Gotcha. So it's basically, it's from what my experience and from what it sounds like, the OT world it's a large but small community. So I feel like it's always good to have, a nice connection with a lot of the people that you work around and even go to school with and learn from and all of that.
Yeah, the OT world is very small. Like even just considering Los Angeles, people like across the county will know each other through mutual friends or whatever. So for sure. Yeah.
So be respectful to everybody, I guess.
You never know who you're going to run into.
So I know you brought up the NBCOT, so that actually brings up my next question. What were some steps that you took to prepare for it, and what do you recommend for new grads?
Yeah, so thankfully, at West Coast University, that's where I graduated from, they provide the AOTA PDF study pack type of thing. If you already have your AOTA membership, and you get it you get it free as long as you have the AOTA membership. So I think first and foremost, taking advantages of those resources you get from your OT program, that will help you prepare and study for the NBCOT. So that's number one, because you don't want to spend too much money on those study materials if you don't really need all of them, right? So first, take advantage of what you get for free. Second advice I would give is don't overload with all the resources. So I know some people who literally studied like AOTA, NBCOT, therapy ed, like True Learn. What it goes on and on and on, and it gets too much, right? I say go max 3, and that's all you need, just 3 resources. So for me personally, I went through AOTA, NBCOT, and True Learn. I like those 3 because they are all online. And when you are taking the exam, you're taking it on a computer. So I wanted to train my brain on being able to tolerate like 5 hours of staring at a screen for a long time. And it's also nice because with AOTA and NBCOT, they have practice quizzes and practice tests, which I think is going to be very helpful with your test taking strategies, because that's going to help a lot with kind of breaking down the questions and actually passing the test.
Right.
Because you can know the material, you can spend all the time knowing the material, but if you don't know how to break down the question, that's going to like make or break it. And then the same thing with True Learn too. It's all just practice questions, practice tests. So that's what my main focus was on, is taking a bunch of tests and questions and then just studying the rationale. So studying the rationale is very important.
So kind of getting an idea of how the questions are worded and how the answers are provided, and also building up your stamina, your test taking stamina.
Yes.
And just knowing how to read the question properly and knowing what it's asking.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of students have trouble with, is just the breaking down of the question and really analyzing like, what is it actually asking me? Because sometimes they'll throw you off by putting too much information, and that's where you're gonna end up second guessing yourself.
I see.
And that leads to my next tip is, do not second guess yourself when you are taking this exam, because 90% or 99% of the time you guess something and you feel like that's like your first gut, you should go with that answer, because a lot of students are gonna trip up, they're gonna second guess themselves, and then the question that they changed their answer to the first answer ended up being the right one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I had that experience actually taking one of my final exams, and it was just so funny because my professor was, at the time, she was joking with me. She was like, I wanted to pull my hair out because you chose the right answers, but you kept changing it. And so lesson learned, and I'm definitely going to take that with me taking the NBCOT, because don't want to do that again.
Right, definitely.
Just to kind of backtrack a little bit about the process of getting into work after graduating, what were some things that you wished you knew before applying, or maybe while you were applying?
I wish I knew a little bit more about what benefits were. Like, this is all new terminology that I did not know about until I actually had to apply for a job and, understand the benefits. So I wish I did a little bit more research on like what 401k actually means, and if they like match the 401k and all of that, because that's all important in the longevity of how you want to stay, like how long you want to stay in that company. I also wish I did a little bit more research on the work environment, and that's going to take a little bit more like detective work, is figuring out the work environment, because that's going to make it or break it for me. Like, I'm the type of person that will sacrifice a little bit of a pay cut if that means I get to work in an environment that has more mentorship, a strong, supportive coworker, employee type of relationship, and very supportive managers. Like, that's priority for me. Yeah. So thankfully, I lucked out where I work, where they do support that. But for some people, they might not care about that, and they would rather have the money. So kind of doing a little bit more research on the pros and cons of a different company or a different setting.
So I guess what you value in a workplace setting. Okay.
Yeah, because so for my setting, right, they don't pay as competitive as other hospitals, but we do have better benefits in terms of like continuing education, 401k, PTO, all that kind of stuff, and also the work culture and the work environment.
Right.
Whereas like other people don't value that. So thankfully I knew that coming in, but other people won't understand that. And then what's going to happen is you're going to see more turnover because all they care about is the pay.
The pay, yeah.
Which kind of sucks for the company because we don't want them to just be like a teaching hospital.
Mm-hmm.
But if people actually took the time to research that a little bit more, then it would prevent that from happening. So
yeah, so a little self-reflection too. Like, what do you want as a new grad? What do you want in a professional setting?
Right. Are you there to try to hustle and pay off your loans right away? Which, I mean, everybody's trying to do that, right? Are you trying to work at a place that does loan forgiveness in that case? Or are you going to work for a place that has a really, really high pay rate? You know,
my next question actually relates to mentorship. And I know you value mentorship in the workplace. So, and I'm actually with you on that. I feel like I would want to go into a place where I know I'm going to have that support and I know I can always, ask for help if needed.
Yeah.
So with mentorship for you, how do you reach out for mentorship? Like, well, as a current practitioner?
Thankfully, I have really friendly and chill supervisors and coworkers. So whenever I have a patient where I just get stuck and I don't know what to do with them, or they have some kind of complex deficit where I don't have as much experience treating, we have some senior therapists where I confidently know I can reach out to them and feel comfortable asking for their advice. We also have a really great supervisor who is flexible, and he will literally sit with us and break down, okay, if the patient presents with this, how can we address that? So definitely having a supportive coworker environment. And then also, I'm not afraid to reaching out to my mentors from school, from OT school. So thankfully, my mentors from OT school, I am more close with them now because now they're my coworkers because I work where I graduated from. So I'm not afraid to just email them, text them if I'm really close with them, and just offer or ask for some time to get some mentorship in that way. And I think that's important as new grads, is to not feel afraid to do that, because they were here in the very beginning of your OT journey with the expectation that they'll be with you for the rest of the life, right? So
that actually is so nice to hear. I mean that's so beautiful to hear, because a lot of students, I think they might share the same sentiment that I'm about to share, but I feel like a lot of us feel this kind of pressure where we feel like, oh, we should already know it going into the field, so that's why it's hard or scary to ask supervisors or maybe ask other people for help, because maybe it's a little bit of a pride thing, or maybe it's a little bit of a fear thing, but so that's a really nice thing to say, because I think it breaks down that, I guess, the stigma or the barrier that we should already have to know everything right off the bat. Exactly.
I mean, I remember when I graduated, they were like, oh, we went from your professor, now we're your colleague, and I think that just changed my perspective of how they are as individuals. And it's like, yeah, you guys are my colleagues, I should totally feel okay to reach out to you if I need advice. So yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. And that's how you build your community.
Yes.
You have to build your own community and therefore add on to it. So yeah, that's why when you take on your own mentees, I guess, you're kind of extending that too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I guess in a way that's still advocating for, the profession. You're building those bridges for, yourself, and then bridging it onto other people.
Exactly. So. And it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing.
Yeah. Love that. Thanks,
and you can tell right away if they don't want to do that. But I think a lot of OTs, they have this optimism in them where they just want to continue that mentorship.
Yeah. That's why this is here too. At least that's the goal.
Yeah.
So, thinking about, work environment and work culture, and, as a new grad and you're about to take on a new full caseload, I guess I have a couple questions about all of that. So my first question is, how do you acclimate to a new work environment? Do you have any tips on what not to do?
So I was in a very lucky situation where where I work were from referrals. So because I work through referrals, I knew the people who worked there. So I already had a sense of their work culture because they were kind of my friends first. So I knew how they were as friends, and now it's kind of seeing them in a different lens as coworkers because we're now in a professional environment. And it was a nice transition because everybody was very friendly, very supportive. I think what also helps is not just like the therapist, but also the nursing staff and the doctors were the exact same way.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I think just having that optimistic sense of the environment helped with acclimating it because I'm an optimistic person, and it was just easier to transition. Now, if I were to reflect back to like my field work, for example, where I was working in a place where I literally knew nobody in there, that's going to take a little bit more time to get used to, right? Because you're still getting a sense of how the people are, what their personality is like. The overall structural setting of the environment too is going to be new. So I think if you are going into a place blind, definitely take a longer time to get acclimated because one small incorrect step can actually influence your dynamic with your coworkers. Potentially, you don't know.
Gotcha.
You're meeting them for the first time, right? So that's why you want to take a little bit more time in that sense. But
so a good way would be to I guess like observe how they operate. What's their system like? Even where do they put their towels? Like you don't want to put it in the wrong spot. Like I mean, in theory, right? So I guess so from what I'm gathering and from my experience, you would take a step back and observe how your managers do it, what maybe ask them what they expect from you, observe how maybe the senior therapists do things, and how the newer therapists do things there, and then from there form yourself into the mold.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to come in too strong. Because then that's going to mess up the whole flow of everything, especially if you're coming in with a group of people who have been working together for years and then you just started there.
Right.
So try to ease your way in it, right? And then eventually as you get in there, you're going to assist in that flow. And it's just going to get a lot better that way.
Okay. But it does sound like it seems a little easier if you know the people that you work with.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Another thing too is that it helps that my referrals also graduated from the same program as me. So we already had that same academic curriculum. So we kind of knew the same things. We knew the same interventions. And you know, it might seem wrong because it's like, oh, everybody here is from the same place. We're not going to get a variety. That's you know, everybody is learning different things from different therapists. And we also take different Con Ed courses. We had different field work experiences. So I think we're just kind of building on each other. And it helps that we're familiar with each other already.
Yeah, so. You guys already have the dynamic.
Yes. Yeah.
And just for some of the listeners who don't know, but Con Ed is just continuing education classes.
Oh, yes.
Cool, awesome. So, now that you know the workplace flow, what about your own flow? Like, for example, let's say you go in and you have all these different cases that you've never really worked with before. How do you incorporate, studying and preparing as, like, let's say you're already hired on and all of that. Like, how do you incorporate studying in your flow, I guess?
So that's an interesting question because I don't think there was a time where I felt like I had to, like, spend a night studying for stuff after work. Okay. Now, that could be because I had a really great manager who sat down and asked me which diagnoses am I comfortable with, which diagnoses am I not comfortable with, and which ones are you curious with, right? So I told my supervisor, these are the diagnoses I'm good with, these are the ones I don't have as much experience with. Okay, let me start you off with the ones you are experienced with, and then we'll just kind of gradually build that way. So I think that's like a huge green flag, especially when you are coming into a job as a new grad, is that communication of your personal experiences and fieldwork and how you can transition from a student to a new grad is going based on what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because if they are overloading you with diagnoses that you have no experience with, and it's just going to like ruin your night because you have to like brush up on them, and then you come into work the next day and you don't even know if you're doing it right, that's going to be very bad later on for
Right.
not even just you, but also the patient, because you don't want to be at risk for doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So thankfully, like understanding your self-awareness of like who or what diagnoses you're comfortable with and communicating that with your supervisor is going to help, and then they'll just build gradually on those complex cases. Because again, you want to be comfortable in a gradual way. We want to increase the challenge and increase the complexity, but in a gradual way.
Like what we would do with our clients, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like grading our...
Yeah. Grading.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's cool. It sounds like your supervisor's amazing. So maybe there's other like supervisors or even fieldwork instructors out there who might even take some of this and be like, hey, those are some good strategies. Like, I'm going to start doing that with my team or my students. So
yeah. And it's funny you brought out fieldwork instructors, because this is a similar strategy that I would do for my fieldwork students. So if I have a level 2 student for 12 weeks, I'm not going to give them a full caseload their first week, obviously, right? That's way too much. Even if they are in their level 2B, their second rotation, sure, they had experience in their first one, but still they're not entry level yet. Right. So just having that gradual build, okay, first week you're going to do 1 session. Second week you're going to do 2. Maybe third week you're going to do 2, but more complex diagnoses, or, trying to build it that way. Because again, I don't want to overkill the student, because it's going to fry their brain and they might not even enjoy coming into fieldwork anymore. Yeah. And I just want it to be like a pleasurable learning experience for them. So
that's awesome. Oh my gosh, can I be your fieldwork child?
Yeah, come on.
Let me extend into a second capstone maybe.
Right?
Let's see, the next question that I have. Okay, so this one is a popular one. A lot of other students actually have had the same question, and I think maybe you might be able to share your experience or some other people's experience if you've heard of them talk about it. But the whole imposter syndrome. We have an episode loaded up about self-esteem versus imposter syndrome. But in your own perspective, what was your experience with imposter syndrome, if you did experience it?
Sure. I think I experienced it more as a new fieldwork student. Coming in, this is my first time actually applying everything I learned in the OT program. And I worked as an aide before coming into OT school, but it's like now that I have all this knowledge, am I actually going to be comfortable being more hands-on with the patient, right?
Right.
So I felt a little bit more of that with my fieldwork. As a new grad now, do I have it? Not as much. Now, and I'm not trying to say like this is me being cocky or whatever. I think it's just during fieldwork, I had the opportunity to be more comfortable and confident with those knowledge and skills that I was learning and practicing and applying with our patients. Now, there are some cases where I might feel more of that imposter syndrome, depending on the complexity of the patient. So if I have somebody who has like a crazy TBI and like their whole body is messed up, plus they have pulmonary issues and cardiac, as complex as it can get, I'm going to feel imposter syndrome, because I'm like, I want to keep this person alive, but I don't know what I'm doing, right?
Right.
But that is where, if I do experience that, I'm just going to simply reach out to my mentors, my coworkers, my supervisors, and they're going to help me overcome that. Now, as a student, it's very common, especially as a new grad, to feel that imposter syndrome. Yeah. And I think my biggest tip is to find strategies to address that. So an example would be like my fiance. As a new grad, he's a physical therapist, by the way. As a new grad, he had imposter syndrome real bad. Like, he felt like he could not work in an outpatient setting, which is what his dream was, with any confidence. He totally felt like he couldn't treat a patient. What did he do? He applied for a orthopedic residency and was like, okay, I just need 1 year of devoted one-on-one mentorship where I am only treating this specific diagnosis so I can build on that skill and that knowledge.
That's awesome.
So that was just like 1 year of dedication, and then now he's feeling more confident, more skilled, and he definitely feels comfortable treating that population. So I think just not being afraid to address and be more self-aware, like, okay, I need to actually feel more confident, and what do I need to do that? Maybe taking continuing education classes, maybe getting one-on-one mentorship, which I think there's actually more out there, like for OT specifically. People are doing mentorship like on social media or something. And just reaching out to like past coworkers, whoever you feel can provide as much support as you need during this time.
Yeah, so the importance of networking and community for sure. Because I mean, there are times where I feel like, you know, I guess when someone experiences imposter syndrome, they might not feel like it might go hand in hand with what we were talking about earlier, where they might be too afraid to ask for help or even, you know, broaden their knowledge base because they feel like they should already know this. But that's not always the case. Like realistically, it's not the case for even seasoned professionals. They're constantly learning. We're all constantly learning and trying to adapt to maybe new presentations of diagnoses, for example, or new client-specific strategies. So it's okay to not know, but it's also more important to take the initiative as a new grad and as a new professional to expand your knowledge base. So
to know.
To know, exactly. So, and also congrats to both you and Jeremy.
Thank you.
And congrats to Jeremy for passing his residency. That is awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Power couple over here, everybody. All right, so that leads me to my very last question for you today. Can you explain a time where you experienced a very difficult client, and how did you handle that or diffuse a situation?
So I have a few in mind of difficult situations. One that I can think of is when I was a fieldwork student. So this is my first fieldwork rotation. It was in an inpatient rehab hospital, and I was treating a stroke patient. So at the time, it was already at the point of my rotation where I'm getting a little bit more independence. So my CI would have more distant supervision, which I'm cool with. You know, I think that will help me be more confident, right, in how I'm communicating and treating the patient. So I was basically treating the patient, and we were doing just like edge of mat stuff, working on sitting balance, and all of a sudden I see him just have a very blank stare, and I would try to alert him or orient him, and he would just not give. And then I was just like, hey, and then I would just like be like, hey, Danny. I was just calling my CI, and then my CI just runs over and then takes over the situation because he already knew what was happening. And what was happening was my patient was having a seizure. So thankfully my CI handled it really well, where he kind of just took over, called another supervisor, and they just did the whole seizure protocol. Patient's okay now. But I think this just brings awareness as, you know, as a fieldwork student, like if you're dealing with patients who are in a very acute stage of a medical condition that they are recovering from, and you notice even just the smallest signs of like a seizure, of another stroke, of passing out, definitely be wary of all that, because it can happen. And when it does happen, it happens fast. And that's where you just need to like handle the situation professionally and objectively, and just be like, okay, call your CI over. They know how to handle it professionally.
And your CI called his supervisor.
Yes.
So, okay. So
and
it's
then,
like a chain of command type
exactly, yeah. And then they rolled him on his side, the whole seizure thing. But so that's when I was a fieldwork student. That's the one I can vividly remember, and I was just so glad I caught it early on. So yeah, something to be aware of. Now, as a OT in the rehab setting, you will get patients who are going to refuse you. That's just like no doubt about it, right? Like I dealt with so many patients who will yell at me, like, I don't want to do therapy, like, F you, like, I don't need it, you know, that kind of thing. Now, there are some therapists who are going to be very passive about it, and they're like, okay, bye. For me, if I get a refusal, I take that very offensive because I know therapy is going to be beneficial for them. Yeah. So if it gets to the point where the patient is just getting like verbally abusive or they don't value what you can do, you just need to be stern and tell the patient like, hey, I'm doing this for you. Do you want to go back home safely and do the things you want to do or not? Because if not, I can just take my time to somebody who wants it. And usually something like that, like as stern as that, they're going to be like, oh, you're right. You are here for me. Like they just need to realize that.
Yeah.
And then they end up being okay. And then they do therapy.
See, sometimes different approaches work for other people. Maybe like the passive one works for some, but like the being firm and knowing when to use that, that's also another skill to kind of like develop.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Which I did not have as thick of a skin as a new grad. Now these 2 years of working, it's like, I don't know how it happened. I just learned how to be firm and straight to the point.
Yeah, no, so that also takes practice. So you're kind of growing the callus. You're like not taking things as personally.
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah.
That's also good to know as a new grad, right? Or even going into field work, you might experience these clients who refuse you or will say mean things to you or will even try to do inappropriate things to you. And the best thing that you can do as a professional is remain calm and, think of the next steps. Like, what can I do to protect myself and what can I do that will benefit the patient? But what's the professional thing to do?
Right.
That kind of brings me to one of the experiences that I had in my field work. It was my 2B and I was in a hand therapy setting and I absolutely adore my CI and I really, really admire how she handled this specific situation. So we had a client who was harassing and basically saying inappropriate things, gesturing inappropriately, and just for the sake of the podcast, I'm not really going to go into full detail, but just inappropriate and uncomfortable for everybody around, right? There are other patients in there. There were other students there, so it was very uncomfortable. So what my CI did was she kind of, in a very professional and like calm tone, she told him, look, we're here to take care of you. And we want you to stay here, but if you are going to keep acting like that and behaving like that, we're going to ask you to leave. Which I think is appropriate, like very, very appropriate. Like there should be steps. So it's like a warning.
Yeah.
And then, okay, if you're not going to listen, then we will have to tell you to leave. And if you're not going to listen, then we're going to call the cops.
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel like I feel like there should be some resources out there that kind of have like a specific, or maybe if it's even like site specific, and certain companies have different policies on what to do about this type of behavior from patients. But yeah, so it's just something to expect and something to think about as a new grad, as a student, even as a professional. Like how do we handle these difficult situations?
Right. And it's crazy that you mentioned this was in an outpatient clinic because for me, I would have never thought something like that would happen in an outpatient clinic because people are going to you for therapy.
Exactly.
Like I could see it would make sense in like the school based or, at like the hospital because they're a little bit more crazy there. But in outpatient, that's so crazy. It just goes to show it can literally happen anywhere, right?
We're working with all sorts of people from different backgrounds. Who like have a different way of doing things and speaking, and so it's just something to be aware of. And as therapists, we have to be open-minded, but also like know when to protect ourselves. Know
when there's like a zero tolerance to that.
Exactly, because if it's endangering the safety of other patients in the area, then that's when it becomes like a main concern,
right?
Because as therapists, we can say, hey, cut it out, that's not okay. But then if it's starting to make other people not feel safe, then that's when we kind of have to use, our authority in the clinic to mitigate that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to the very end of the podcast. I just want to say thank you, Dr. V, for sharing all of the great tips that you had. I know a lot of other students will find this useful. I find it super useful as well. I know I'm going to take it with me as we finish up the capstone and all of that. So thank you. Huge thank you. And a big cheers because this has been awesome. And I hope you guys found this useful and you get to take some of these tips and tricks with you as you move on with your journey. Don't forget to email us with the link below at teawithots@gmail.com. We would love, love, love to hear from you guys. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.